Hey everybody, welcome to chapter 6, Communicating in a Noisy World. There's certainly no doubt the world we live in is noisy, full of all sorts of things telling us different things and telling us to believe this person or not believe another. And so it can be challenging to know how to communicate well as a supervisor or as a manager, communicating to your people. Um, so you are very aware of the fact that communication has changed, although not really, because communication has been relatively unchanged since you've become old enough to care about it, unless you're my age. Um, and so here's just a little definition of communication up on the screen. I won't read it to you, but I think an important thing to recognize is that communication is two-way. So sometimes we put a message out there, but we don't really listen to what's coming back. That's not really communicating. That's just messaging. Okay. So in order for us to be successful, we've got to have a two-way exchange of information for that to be communication. And here's the thing I'm talking about when I say it's changed, but not really if you're under about 30, which is that social media has always been there if you're under 30. I mean, maybe it wasn't there when you were a little kid, but since you've been old enough to care about communication, social media has been a part of your life. If you're my age, you remember a time when there was no um, Facebook or no, it was MySpace before that, but just barely actually. And so it's been out there quite a while. And the bottom line is that we are overloaded with information, and so that has become makes it very difficult to understand what is truth and what is uh, information that is being pushed out there by individuals who have an agenda rather than just trying to give us information. So what does this mean to us as managers when we're trying to communicate? Um, well, first of all, it means that we can't just rely on social media as a means of communicating with the people we work with. We need to still, have face-to-face and in-person communications. But it also means we have to remember that the people we're communicating with live in a world where there's a constant flow of information. So we've got to find ways to help our information cut through that and be meaningful. So um, there's a couple terms on here again, body language, but then which just means, I mean, it's obvious, right? It's the way we talk. It's the way we use our facial expressions and our posture to communicate what we're trying to communicate. Um, but recognize there's some formal channels of communication. The first is what's called downward communication. That's management communicating to people who are subordinate to them on the organizational chart of the company. And that can be done better or worse, right? We've probably seen both examples in our life, people who are really good at sort of telling you what you need to know without making you feel like uh, they're the boss and you're the peon, and and then those people who aren't so good at that, and they just sort of like bark orders and expect you to jump. And then upward communication is the way we communicate up the chain. I found personally this is a particular weakness of mine. I struggle with communicating upward without sounding like I'm being insubordinate. I tend to tell it how I think I'm telling it like it is, but really I'm not hearing management. I'm just telling them what I think they should hear. MBWA, or management by walking around, that's just another way of saying managers should be out and about and understanding the nature of what's going on with the people that report to them, um, as opposed to just staying in their office all the time and having no idea what's going on. And finally, horizontal communication is communication among people who are not subordinate to you or not senior to you on the organizational chart, but are your coworkers. And all of these things, well, at least downward, upward, and horizontal, really need to be happening for an organization to be successful. And then management by walking around, I'm not sure why they lumped it like that, but it's something that's more of a means by which a lot of these happen. If you think about it, the boss can communicate with people just by going around, to their office and saying hi and talking about what their needs are and listening. and people can do the same. They can go out and walk around and talk amongst themselves. Or so I think MBWA is more of a conduit for these other three types of communication to happen. Then there's sort of informal channels, right? Like hearing stuff through the grapevine. I heard this the other day. Someone was telling me about it. I think social media often fills the grapevine role today. We hear stuff that we don't know exactly how true it is. And as a supervisor, we need to just be aware that there are informal channels of communication going on. The second bullet point, like realize it's impossible to eliminate the grapevine. I think not only should we realize it's impossible, but it would be a bad idea even if you could somehow eliminate the grapevine. It's an important mode of communication. Instead, we listen to it and address it. That's what being a good manager is. Not necessarily by saying, I heard this and you guys shouldn't be talking this way, but by actually just, this is my favorite management technique when it comes to communication, especially when I'm senior, when I'm the boss and I'm communicating to people, is I just call it the management style of being cool. And what I mean by that is, like, you don't have to freak out about everything. Just be cool about it. Listen to what people have to say. Ask yourself, what is the truth in all this and what can I do about it? And if there's not much you can do about it, be honest and tell people that. And if there is something you can do about it, do something about it. Like, that's just called being cool. Anyway, so again, I won't read all these to you. I think you're smart enough to know that things aren't true just because you saw them on the internet or saw them on Twitter or saw them on Facebook, or you received an email. Recognize that anybody can put stuff out there, right? There's no vetting to stuff that's published through online and social networks. That being said, web-based networks can be really valuable to us too. So again, see them as an opportunity to listen and learn. So now back to face-to-face communications. Recognize that your body language is communication. Again, something I've had to realize is a weakness for me. I make faces when I think something's BS or when I think something is, not coming across well. And I've had to learn not to do that. And I still struggle with it because when something's BS, it smells like BS, and you usually make a face. So remember that as a supervisor, your body language is communicating something to your employees. And also recognize that if you're an employee, your body language is communicating something to your bosses and to the people you work with. And recognize it's not always universal. It is often quite universal, meaning, the same faces are very similar, or the same, people tend to stand certain ways when they're upset or when they're relaxed. So as much as I say it's not universal, there's a lot of cues that are pretty universal, but recognize it's not always universal. It doesn't always cross cultures well. It doesn't always cross individuals. Certain individuals that have certain places on the autism spectrum are not good at reading body language or don't understand it in a consistent way. And so remember, you have to understand who you're dealing with too and be more cognizant of your body language. So here are some barriers to effective communication. Again, I won't read them all to you, but I'll read a couple, like noise, which is like these things that distort the messages we're trying to send. And that can be anything from other issues that are going on in the world. So when we're trying to send one message, but there's other stuff going on in the office, certain politics or things that can create noise, and the message may not come across as clearly as we mean for it to. And then stereotyping, right? We tend to assume that certain groups of people will share the same attitudes, values, and beliefs. And so we tend to throw something out there thinking that it's obviously understood. We have an issue with that in our community here, where there's a dominant religious group in the community. And so people will make assumptions that every person that belongs to that group is going to take things the same way, and it's not always true. And so we have to recognize that we're working with individuals and adjust to making sure that we're doing that. Again, you can read the others, and you should read the others, but I won't read them all to you. So ways that we overcome the barriers. This is the biggest one, the top one, preparation and planning. In other words, when you're going to go into a scenario where you have to communicate with someone, especially in a formal communication setting, you should prepare and plan, right? Try to foresee some of those barriers and how you might deal with them. Try to foresee some of the questions or concerns people will have and be prepared to respond to those. And again, you can read the others. It's often very valuable, down the third one down, to repeat messages several times. That's just because people's minds wander. They don't always hear exactly what you think they're hearing. And also sometimes it just takes time to sink in sometimes, especially if you're trying to communicate a change. And reinforcing words with action goes along with that. But the second one, taking time to listen, is critical. Okay, well, it says critical in the bullet point, but like, if you think of yourself as just putting out information, but you're never hearing what's coming back, you're likely to fail as a manager. You've got to listen and hear what people are saying. Remember, communication is a two-way process. And so if people have concerns about the message you're giving, rather than thinking, oh, they're just stupid and they don't get it, you'd be way better off to try to hear their concerns and ask yourself, are there truths here, and what can I do about it? And again, if there's nothing you can do about it, communicate that, saying, hey, I hear you, but I can't exactly change this or that or the other. So how can we work within this? And if you can make changes, do, as long as it's appropriate to do so. All right, so here's a little model put out by the textbook authors called the 6 Pillars for Successful Supervisory Communication. Number 1 is give people timely and complete information. You've probably all dealt with somebody, work or school, where they don't give you timely information in a time you can do something with it, or accurate information or complete information, and it's frustrating. So that's the kind of the big pillar there. Strive to be understood and to understand. Again, be clear in what you're saying, but also hearing what other people are saying. Understand how your actions and your body language are influencing others. Keep messages short and simple. You and I know that when someone tries to give you too much information, say like this long PowerPoint, it's really hard to focus on it long enough to get all of the information. So the shorter and simpler you can keep the information, the more likely you are for people to hear you and act on it. Encourage people to ask questions, and the way you encourage people to ask questions is by not making them feel stupid when they ask a question, right? If people feel validated for asking questions, they're more likely to do it. If they feel like you don't really want to hear the question, or that you give non-answers, or that you make them feel stupid, they're not going to ask questions anymore. And finally, follow up and make sure that the message is doing what it was intended. So after you put the message out there, you got to see if it was actually received in the same way you intended for it to be received. And that's harder sometimes than it sounds like. Last slide. So if you have to meet with your boss, how do you do that in a way that's going to make it the best possible meeting? Again, I won't read all those to you, but I will highlight a couple of them. Number 1 is plan your agenda. Don't go into a meeting with the boss. It says don't go to the boss naked. I think that's the same as plan your agenda. Don't go in there without a plan of what you're going to talk about. Be prepared to talk about the things that you're going to talk about and to respond to questions that the boss might have. Be truthful, but also, you don't have to be a butt kisser, right? Just be truthful, and you don't also have to be nasty. Just find that balance in the middle. Let's see. Try not to put your boss on the defensive, and also try not to be a complainer. In other words, there's a fine line that could be challenging between making the boss aware of things and complaining. And most of us have not mastered it. It's challenging. And then I think finally the last one I want to highlight is leave on a positive note. You're more likely to get your boss to actually look into fixing things if they don't think that you hate them. And so when when you can share some things you truly appreciate about what's happening where you work, and that as well as some of the things and challenges you're facing, you're far more likely to have success getting those challenges addressed. So try to leave with a recognition of some of the positive things that are happening as well. So anyway, I hope this chapter is an interesting one for you. I hope you don't just stop with the thing I've recorded here, but that you actually read through the whole chapter, because there's some really valuable information that's really timely in the sense that we just have a world that is full of noise, and learning to communicate better is going to be kind of critical to your succeeding as both an employee and as a supervisor.